Hello and welcome back to part 4 of the Werewolf video tutorial series from BlenderCookie.com. My name is Jonathan Williamson, and we're going to go ahead and do the part that most of you have been waiting for on the Werewolf, and that is the actual transformation. Now, I hope that nobody gets too upset after this, because it's actually a lot easier than it sounds. Now that we have our two models set up, we have our male head here and our werewolf head here that we sculpted in the previous parts. We could actually set up the transformation in under 5 minutes. Now, we can do any amount of fine-tuning that we want to those transformations, but I'm going to go ahead and show you the basics of it, and then we'll also kind of finalize the effect with just some very simple camera movement and camera shake that we would then be able to render out the final video. So, let's get started. What I have here is I just have a new scene open up. I've just saved it as a separate file, just werewolf_transformation. And the reason that I've done this is since I have the high resolution sculpts, each in their own file, the werewolf and the human head, I want to go ahead and just bring them into a new file. And the reason being is simply for protection. With this transformation that we're going to do, it requires us to apply the multi-resolution modifiers so that we have an actual mesh in there, rather than using all the sculpted details. And so in the case of a major screw up, or if we decide that we want to go back, maybe remove one of the higher levels of subdivision, or we want to resculpt a bunch of things, then that way we still have the backup models as the original source that we can work on no problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and append in the previous models on this, and we'll just pull them in here, find it real quick. Okay, so underneath part 4, I've got Werewolf 03 Human and Werewolf 03 Werewolf. So I'll first just pull in the human side. And something to note is, as soon as this actually will pull in, there we go. Okay, we want to just go ahead and pull in the objects. So we're going to grab the human, the teeth, and in the case of the human side, we're actually going to not get the eyes, because something that we did in one of the first parts was we actually, for better or for worse, we added in the shape keys on the werewolf eyes. And actually it's for the better, because this is a step that we need to do anyway, so it just saves us a step now. So we don't actually want to import the human eyes, because we're actually going to join our meshes together. So let's just go ahead and append these in. And we can now see them real quick here. Oops. And I'm actually working on a fresh install, so I forgot to change a couple of my settings, such as rotate around selection, and also emulate 3-button mouse and emulate numpad, since I'm on a laptop with a tablet. Okay. So now I have the head here. I'll go ahead and select the cube. I'm just going to delete it. And we can see our sculpt. Well, let's go ahead and append in the werewolf as well. So we can just grab it from right here. We want this one. Actually, we want all 3 of these. Okay, and we'll just click append, and that pulls them right in. And now what we want to do first off is let's go ahead and just select the werewolf side, and we'll go over to the modifier, and we want to just go ahead and click apply. Now I'm just going to immediately hit H to hide it, to get it out of the way. We'll select the werewolf teeth, and just to save us a little bit of memory, when we did the teeth, it was really pointless to go up all the way to level 7. We really don't need that much detail, and we're not going to see all of that. So I'm just going to drop it down. We'll just go ahead and drop it down 2 levels while doing this, just to save us a lot of memory. If you notice up here, when we go from one level to the other, you can see that it nearly doubles. And so this will just save us a lot of memory. So let's just go ahead and click apply, and then we'll hide that. Let's select the human head. Be sure that we take it up to level 5. We'll click apply, hide that. Let's select the teeth here. And something that I want to do, first off, if you remember, this still has our original mirror modifier on it. And so we first need to go ahead and click apply. And then just for my testing, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you now that if you don't do this next step, you're going to have a problem, and you're going to have to redo the teeth. And what it is, we just need to hit tab to go into edit mode, select everything, and then just hit Control N to recalculate the normals. If you don't do that on this part of the teeth, you're actually going to see some really weird deformation go on once we add in the shape keys for the transformation. So if you forget this step, you'll find out why, and you're going to end up backtracking and having to redo that. Okay, so now let's go ahead and add in a multi-resolution on this. And remember, we're not going to worry about the sculpting for the time being on the human teeth, partially because we barely see them, and also just because I know all of you are eager to see the actual transformation. So let's just go ahead and subdivide this. We're going to go all the way up to level 5. And there we go. That's all we need. And we can just click Apply. So now it has the exact same number of vertices as the previous one. And we'll just hit H to hide that. And then actually we're just going to hit Alt-H to unhide everything because we're ready to go ahead and do the transformation. So the way that this works is we're going to go ahead and use the human head as our final mesh. And what we'll do is let's just go ahead and select the werewolf head. Then we'll select the human head. Let's go over to the shape keys here. And remember, each one of these has the exact same number of polygons since we created them to the same multi-resolution sculpt level and from the exact same base mesh. And this is the key to actually making this work. If you don't do it, it won't work. Okay, so underneath the shape keys here, let's just go ahead and click this arrow and join as shapes. And you should immediately see another werewolf and a basis shape added. We can go ahead and select the werewolf now, and we're just going to drastically hit X and delete it. We don't need it anymore. And before I actually show you what this has done, let's go ahead and do the same thing with the teeth. So we'll select the werewolf teeth, then we'll select the human teeth, and we're going to join as shapes. We'll reselect the werewolf teeth, hit X, and delete. Okay, now I'm going to do one more thing, and that is just to join both of these together. So we'll just select both of them and hit Control J. That won't harm our shape keys at all, but allow us to see it all in one step. So if you're ready to see this, let's go ahead, just select the werewolf key, and we'll move this over a little bit so we can see it. Let's go ahead and save our file before we lose anything, and let's just increase the sculpt value here. And just like that, we get a beautiful transformation from a human head to a werewolf head. Simple as that. Then we can also increase the werewolf teeth, and it fits perfectly. You also notice that since the deformation follows the same basic path, if we go ahead and just say set this to 0.5, select this one, set it to 0.5, they still fit together. And so even though they're separate meshes, or actually, well, they're separate meshes within the single object, they still fit perfectly. And so what you'll also notice is that at any one of these points, let's say this one here, now I'm going to cross my fingers for just a second because this may not be completely true, but I believe it is. I believe at this point we can actually go into sculpt mode and just modify. I'm going to go ahead and save my file before I do anything. And if, say, we want to modify it at this level, requires a lock shape. Oh, that's right. I have to turn off. I think that's it. Well, I'm not actually going to worry about it right now. I know that I've done it in the past and that you can actually sculpt on the shape keys, but it requires a locked shape. But again, I'll let you guys play with that any way that you want. But there we go. That's the basis of the transformation. You can also go ahead and set up a minimum and a maximum for the range. If you wanted to set the blending just to certain vertex groups within this, say if you wanted to set it just to the mouth, which with this high of a resolution might create some problems, but you could definitely do it. So that's maybe a little disappointingly as simple as the transformation is. It's very, very easy and works really well as long as both models have the exact same vertex count. But let's go ahead and just create a final effect for this, setting up a camera and some camera shake to get a little bit more value out of this. And I'm also going to go ahead and just select the eyes, and we're just going to set them to smooth shading. We're not going to worry about anything past that, but, oh, and also the eyes, you'll notice that we already set up the path, so we just select them. There's the human, there's the werewolf. Okay, so what we're going to do, let's take all of these back down to 0. Just like that. And now let's go ahead, let's select our camera right in here. We'll go into camera view, and I'm just going to hit period to scale towards the cursor, which is at this origin. We'll just scale towards it. Then I'm going to hit R and then double tap X to rotate around the local X axis, and it looks like I've got proportional editing on, so we'll turn that off. There we go. So R and then double tap X to rotate around the local X axis of the camera. Get a nice view right about in here. That looks pretty good. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up some just simple camera rotation. So here along the timeline, which you can't see the bottom here because it's outside of my recording range. Well, actually here, we'll fix that real quick. We'll just bring that up like that. Okay, so what we're going to do is let's just rotating around the Z-axis. We're going to start right about here, and then we're going to rotate around as the transformation happens. So we'll hit I and insert a keyframe for location and rotation. Let's go ahead and just say move up 30 keyframes. We'll rotate around like this, about like that. We'll go ahead and hit I, insert location and rotation, and then let's go ahead and move up another 20 keyframes. We'll rotate around a little bit more to about there. Hit I, insert location and rotation. If we jump back by holding down Control and down arrow, we can jump between the keyframes. Maybe we'll even this one out just a little bit to be more about the center. I, location and rotation. And let's just jump back to the beginning by hitting Shift left arrow, and we'll hit Alt A to play it back. Notice with this kind of poly count, we're seeing pretty slow playbacks, but that's okay. And that looks pretty good. So we're just going to make it nice and short. We're not going to do a full turnaround or anything like that. But now what I want to do is the really cool part. And that is I want to go ahead and as this rotates around, as soon as we get to right about here, we're going to see the camera start to shake and the werewolf actually transform. So the way this is going to happen, first off, let's go ahead and set up our transformation. So let's select the head. We're going to just hover over the werewolf value and hit I to insert a keyframe there. So this way, at that frame at 31, then it's at 0. We'll do the same thing for the teeth, and we want to do the same thing for the eyes. And then we'll move up 2 keyframes, increase the value all the way to 1, and hit I again. You notice it turns yellow to indicate there's a keyframe on that frame. Then we'll select each one of these, push them up, hit I. Let's select the other keyframe or other shape key, hit I. And so now you'll notice that each one of these is keyed such that if we scroll back through here, you should see it transform along the timeline. So that works really well. And we can go ahead and play this back and see how it looks. Very, very cool. However, it's still a little boring because just to add a little extra interest, what I would like to do is, oops, get my header back there, is I would like to add in some camera shake right through here. Well, there's a couple different ways, or well, there's one way immediately that you might think to do this, and that is to use the F-curve modifiers with the, oops, lost my camera here, there we go. The F-curve modifiers along the curve, which we'll just go ahead and pull up right here, but the F-curves for the camera, we can just add in a noise modifier. However, there's a serious problem with that, in that one unfortunate side to the noise modifiers that if any developers are listening, a great feature that I need to actually speak with somebody about, but a great feature would in fact be to allow a noise modifier to only act or to be activated between specific keyframes, so it have a start and an end. But currently, there's no way to do this. But a different way that we can do it is instead track the camera to, say, an empty and add noise modifiers to that empty with the track to constraint being animated, or the influence of the track to constraint animated such that only between the frames that we want is it taking effect on the camera. So, now this is admittedly a bit of a hack, but it works really well. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to hit Shift A, add in an empty, and then let's select the camera, Shift right click to select the empty, Control T, and track to constraint. So now as the camera moves, it's always going to track to that empty. This is also a great way for positioning the camera. You notice that if I grab this, the camera then moves with it. Very, very cool. Well, on this empty, let's just go ahead and at frame 1, we're going to hit I, insert a location keyframe. Then at frame 51, we're going to insert another location keyframe. This way, we just have a basic curve for that empty to act on. In our F-curve modifier, or our graph editor, let's go ahead and enable the show only selected. So now we have just location keyframes for our empty. And what I want to do is let's hit in and show, oh, actually we need to go ahead and toggle this down. Let's select first the X location. And we're going to just scroll down here and add a modifier. We're going to add a noise modifier. And if we scroll down a little bit more, we can see this. And you'll now notice that we now have a noise modifier here. And as we move back, the empty is moving just slightly along the x-axis, giving us some camera noise. But it's only moving left and right. Well, let's do a couple things. First off, let's go ahead and we'll first just scale this up so we can see it a bit better. First, let's go ahead and decrease the scale on this. Zoom this in so we can see it. There we go. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we'll take the scale down, brings them closer together, and let's also take the strength down to 0.5. That'll make it a little bit more subtle. Okay, well that looks pretty good. Maybe, actually we'll take the scale up a bit. That's a little too much. We'll just go back to 1. Should be about right. And maybe we'll take the strength back to 0.75. Oh, and also actually it would probably help if, there we go. Okay, now let's go ahead and copy this one here, this noise modifier, and then we're going to go ahead and put it on the Y and the Z's, so that way it's along each one of those. And so now we can see that working, but to add in a little variation, let's just go ahead and adjust the phase for each one of these just a little bit, such that they're not identical. So that way we get a little bit more hectic camera motion. And maybe we'll go ahead, let's see, we're going to just adjust some of these a little bit. Some of them are just a little bit too hectic. There we go, that actually looks pretty good. Okay, so that gives us our camera shake. So we add in a little bit more interest, and now this will look better once it's playing back at a normal frame rate rather than 6 frames per second. But we still have the same problem in that it's affecting the entire timeline. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and duplicate this empty, which gives us a second track to constraint. On the camera. So if we now select the camera, we can see under the constraints panel, we should have, that's not right. Here we go. We're going to delete this one. And instead what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and Shift A, add in a second empty, select the camera, then select the empty, Control T, track to constraint. And so now if we select the camera, you'll notice that we have 2 track to constraints on this. And in fact, they actually cancel each other out. So what we're going to do, at frame 31, which is where our transformation starts, we want our first track to constraint. This one is going to be our camera shake. And we'll do smooth camera. There we go. Okay, so at frame 31, we want this one to be locked, this one to be locked, and then as we go up to frame 51, at frame 31, our camera shake is going to be 0, this one will be 1, as we get to 51, actually we ought to do it 10 frames, there we go, at frame 41, then this one is going to be at 1, and this one will be at 0. And so now, both those empties are by default in the same location, so that we're tracking the camera no problem, so that way we don't get a sudden jolt. And as we go through here, as we hit frame 31, we're going to start shaking, and then we get a lot of shake, and then we get our transformation. So very, very cool. And maybe right after the transformation, let's say frame 51, we'll go ahead and take this one back up to 1, and this one down to 0, 61, there we go. So then at frame 61, it'll smooth back out to nothing. There we go. So there we have it. That is the transformation and setting up a basic camera shake. Now what I'm going to go ahead and do is, well, let's actually go ahead and look at how this renders right now. Let's go ahead, let's grab our lamp. We'll just set up a very basic lighting environment real quick. I like to use just a sunspot. Will work quite nicely for this. We'll just rotate it around, put it about here. We don't need to worry about the sky or atmosphere. Let's just see what this renders like. Whoops. This may take just a little bit. Okay, and I still have some of my Z-mats set up. So let's go ahead and take this and go to the materials. We're just going to delete the material. We'll add a new one. And I'm just going to take the specular intensity way down. We'll take the hardness down a bit, and that ought to be just about right. Let's go ahead. We'll set up just a basic environment for it. Or actually, no, we'll just set up a blend sky. We're going to take this down. Take it up to black. And now we can go ahead and render this. Okay, that doesn't look too bad. Let's go ahead and set up some basic global illumination. I'm also going to just set this down smaller so we can see it. We'll just turn on our environment lighting. Let's go ahead and set it to about 0.5. Works out pretty well. We'll use let's try the approximate method first. And we'll go ahead and render this again. Okay, that looks pretty good, but my background it's maybe still a little bit too strong. We'll take it down to 0.25, and let's also go ahead, set the black value up a fair bit, just about like that. We'll save it there. I'll maybe darken this one just a little bit. There we go. And now we'll render this one last time at, say, 50%. Okay, that looks pretty nice. I'm going to darken the background just a little bit. I maybe went a little too light. There we go, something about like that. And then I'm going to do one last thing, and that is strictly to parent the lamp to the camera such that it goes ahead and follows the light around. All right, so now we'll go back to the beginning, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to render this out real quickly, and then I'll show you the final result. Okay, so we're done rendering, and you can see the last frame right here, but let's go ahead and check it out. So we'll just zoom over here, and we can see the final effect. If I just hit play, there we go. So there is our final effect. Quite simple and actually pretty easy, but definitely a great start to something. You know, obviously you could take it a lot further from this point. You know, obviously you could go ahead and texture it. You could animate it. You can do anything else that you want to do. Maybe make the full werewolf. But there's the basics of how to create a human head and a werewolf head, and then create the transformation between them. And obviously this kind of technique can apply to any other transformation. It doesn't have to be a werewolf. It could be, you know, name your creature of the night, anything. It could be anything, a plant growing, any kind of effect that you can think of that's one object transforming into another, feasibly you could use this technique for. Obviously, it's not going to apply to everything, but definitely a good way to do a lot of really cool effects as long as you're okay working with a high-resolution mesh. Now, one thing that we may be looking at, I'm not going to make any guarantees at the moment, but is how to go ahead and retopologize this to create a lower resolution animatable model that we could rig quite easily and look at how to bake out the normal maps for those, including baking out along the transformation. I've got a few details to look into to see if there's a good way to kind of automate that process, maybe through the means of a script, or just doing it hand by hand, which in this case would just mean basically baking out 10 separate frames along the way. But I'm going to kind of mull on that for a little bit and work it out, and definitely be sure that if you want it, if you're looking for that kind of thing, pipe up on the forums. I'd love to see if people are actually interested in that, because if so, I'll definitely push to make it happen. But for the time being, there's your werewolf.